This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Roger Martin. He is the professor of strategic management, Emeritus, at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. When it comes to management, Roger has all the accolades, often labeled one of the top management thinkers globally. Roger's new book, When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. And Roger has a pretty damn big fundamental problem that he sees. We've treated the economy as a machine, pursuing ever greater efficiency as an inherent good. But efficiency has become too much of a good thing. Look, our obsession with this efficiency, it shifted our economy. We used to have a large middle class, smaller numbers of rich and poor, like the bell curve. Now, it's a thin outlier grouping of already super rich getting richer. Now look, I'm the biggest market guy in the world. I salute Jeff Bezos. But again, as Roger points out, have we gone too far? Has efficiency pushed us to something that's not sustainable? Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation with Roger Martin. Roger, you've got right here at the tip of the spear this nice controversial topic that we all are kind of either talking about in our own tribes or yelling at other tribes. We all know there's an issue and we're not really getting much resolution. It starts with the word capitalism. There is whether one calls themselves liberal or whether one calls themselves conservative or libertarian, if they're at all honest with themselves, they have to admit we're at a point in time where things are messy.
I couldn't agree more. And the tribes are indeed yelling at one another. But yes, when I embarked on the project that has resulted in this book, there was not the widespread support for the idea of socialism in America, but there is now. It is a messy situation. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Here's where I want to start. I'm not starting here because it's the start of your book, but it really struck me as an interesting way that you start the book, your introduction, which you call a system out of balance. And you use an example. And I want you to tell me about how that example came to be. Because look, we could talk about so many topics in your book for hours and hours, days and days, weeks and weeks. But I'm really curious the how and why you decided, and I want you to tell the example of this teacher and her feelings and where she is in her life, but why you decided to start the book with that example.
Well, I started it with the example of the teacher who basically is saying, boy, I sort of thought I did what I was supposed to, which is get a graduate education in the field I was interested in. And I thought that would end up with me having a satisfactory, kind of safe economic life, but she feels she's living kind of day to day and just barely making ends meet. But I started the book with that because of two things about her in particular that I thought were striking. One is the sense of bewilderment, the sense of, I thought I did all the right things. And then the feeling of, I really don't know what to do about this. There was a sense of, I don't know how to engage in a way that might make this better. It felt, and she's clearly a good-hearted person. She is a teacher, an elementary school, public school teacher who always wanted to help kids learn. She was a good person, but bewildered and disengaged. And I think that more people in America are bewildered and disengaged than we'd like to believe.
Did you intend that example? You'll see where I'm going here in a second. Because look, there's a lot of things in your work where I'm going to feel like we're aligned. There's going to be other areas where I want to kind of push you and challenge and get some of this controversy to the forefront. But did you intend that example to be controversial?
No, not really, actually. I intended it to be resonant, that a lot of people reading it would, when they think about it, say either, yeah, I kind of feel that way often, or parts of that way often, or I certainly know a number of people who would feel that way. So, no, it actually wasn't. Do you think it is controversial?
The reason I bring it up, I'm an author. I've been kind of a self-entrepreneurial guy ever since Netscape went public in 1995. And when I saw Netscape go public, I saw AOL sending out those disks. I thought to myself, my gosh, the world has forever changed. I had a website up in short order. I had no background, no nothing. I was the complete story. And maybe when you get to the Pareto principle, maybe I'm just one of those crazy people on the edges that decided to do something. But I think for me, I looked at Netscape going public and I was like, wow, the world has changed. So I guess now to look back 25 years now and to think that people are going to take a typical path, a typical degree, that it's going to typically work out okay after watching the dot-com crisis, after watching the 2008 crisis, and now perhaps into the COVID crisis. I guess, yeah, for me, it's a little controversial. But again, I have to look at my own bias and say, am I in that small minority of entrepreneurial thinking that just instantly gets the hives about working for someone?
I suspect that is the case. I mean, you rightly point out there is a subsegment of humanity. You're in it. I'm in it too, because I've taken an entrepreneurial course in my life who want that. But I would argue that the majority, that she's more consistent with the majority of people who choose from day one to enter a career where they will be working for someone else their entire career, whether it's public sector, as in her case, or private sector, as in the case of many people.
Why don't I give you the floor to give people a perspective of the data, the big picture data that this lady, for example, her chosen path compared to prior generations? Because I guess in prior generations, you could have made this path choice and found some stability in life, and that's changed. Where is the data breaking apart, the big picture? I mean, there's all kinds of data sets we can look at, but what are the most important data sets that you think you would want to outline to the audience about why this is broken down?
The biggest one is just stagnation of the median income in America. And the previous generation of our teacher would have expected to have approximately a doubling of real income in a generation, in 30 years. And that's stagnated now, ground almost to a halt, so that the median income that used to be going up at 2.4% compound annual a year is down to 0.6 of 1%. That doubles in over a century. That's what worries me most, because I believe that democratic capitalism will only work if that swing voter, analogize the median family to the swing voter, if that swing voter says, gee, this system is not working for me, it'll have very bad political consequences. If the median voter instead is saying, things are working for me, if I work hard, I can progress. And if people below the median feel like the economy is growing fast enough for people in the bottom half of the economy and is flexible enough, I can advance if I work hard. And that is what worries me the most. And it worries me as much as it worries me because it's been accompanied by not economic stagnation. Actually, the economy has been growing quite decently. Of course, 2020 is a different story, but up to then, the question is, where's all that economic growth going to? And the answer is the very, very, very wealthy. It turns out that the economy is performing in a way that the economic growth, which used to go disproportionately to people lower in the income distribution, is now going wildly disproportionate, not disproportionate, wildly disproportionately to those at the top end of the distribution. And I think that makes stagnation doubly depressing kind of and intimidating for the median. They're saying, not only am I not advancing, those people over there are getting richer than they've ever been before. And that's just not terribly consistent with how I think democratic capitalism needs to work for it to flourish.
Here's where it gets tricky. I can look at a guy like Jeff Bezos and I can say to myself, man, I wish I would have had that idea. I wish I would have stuck with it for 10 years while my share price went sideways. And I can think to myself, gosh, what is it like to have, I don't know, is 175 billion now? And I can say to myself, how great. He's got to be, as Americans, we must just laud him, or anybody to laud him and say, gosh, you just deserve everything you got. You just did this idea and it just worked and you got rewarded for it and there was no ceiling on your reward. But now, I mean, I say all those things and I just completely laud everything he did. But then you look at it and you're like, well, one guy who might be a trillionaire in a couple of years, and you got to say to yourself, that's just untenable.
It is and it isn't. To me, it wouldn't be untenable if the median income was still growing. If the median income was still moving ahead smartly, I'd probably say maybe it's unnecessary and excessive, but it's okay. But it's turning out that it's just so disproportionately taking up the economic growth. That's the tricky part, and then the one where I'd like to parse this very carefully. Nothing in the book nor nothing about me is against entrepreneurship and succeeding on the basis of that entrepreneurship and becoming more wealthy. I do not believe that we can have an income distribution that's completely flat. But if we want to have the flourishing of democratic capitalism, right, as opposed to state capitalism like China, if that's your thing, but I abhor totalitarian capitalism. If you want democratic capitalism, the system, by definition, has to work for the majority of the electorate. There is no choice. The question that I would be asking somebody like Jeff Bezos is, should you, as Amazon, care about whether the workers in your vast empire that make you worth 175 billion, are they going to vote for the continuation of democratic capitalism when they're earning below a living wage? I think it's a useful question to ask, because if you're going to keep on employing more and more and more people like you and like Walmart, and it turns out that those people are earning wages that are really below a living wage, those people are going to ask the question, is this working well enough for me? And I'm not sure. That's a question you want them asking on a daily basis. If you were just being bloody-minded Jeff Bezos, would you want your workers to be asking that question? And I think the answer is definitively no. So the question is sort of, what can the world do about it?
Can I guess here? Let me think if I'm going to guess and read your mind correctly. Have you really ever pondered, you've got a lot more experience than me, so perhaps yes is the answer, but have you ever pondered the idea of a political change, a different form of government in America? I don't think I ever have until this year.
I have. It's not something that I want, but I think America did face this question in 1930, 31, 32 in the absolute depths of the Great Depression, as did many developed countries at the time. And many of the world's developed countries at the time contemplated it and said, let's try socialism, let's try fascism, let's try communism. And America, I think to its credit, said, well, we've got to have some kind of fundamental fixes here. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, on the back of the New Deal, so it wasn't like he sprung it on somebody, on Americans, they said, let's try this, which is a modification of how we prosecute democratic capitalism, but it was still avowedly democratic and capitalist. I mean, there was great unrest there. Veterans marched on Washington for the first and only time in American history. I think there was a sailing closer to the wind than probably has been, at least in the last century or century and a half. And I think we're at one of those sailing closer to the wind moments now. That's why we need people to be thinking pretty carefully and pretty seriously about where we are now, not sort of, well, la-di-da, this too shall pass. Not necessarily.
Let's talk about machines.
Sure.
I want you to define the notion of a machine in the context of our economy. There is a very successful hedge fund manager, a guy named Ray Dalio, who's been talking about the economy as a machine for quite a while. I'm not sure if you're bringing up the phrase machine is connected to Dalio.
Actually not. I just found out about that during my work. I hadn't seen his famous video. Somebody actually pointed, Darren Karn, one of the researchers on the project, pointed it out. He said, hey, Roger, you're talking about the economy as a machine. Do you realize Ray Dalio says just that? So I cannot take any credit. I'll give it to Darren. But yes, I see the way people who think about the US economy think is as if it is a big, complicated machine, kind of like a big, complicated car or truck or airplane. And of course, that's what Ray Dalio says. Oh, it's simple. It's just a machine. The problem with that is there's a difference between a machine, like a car. A car, I think, is a good metaphor in this case. A car, you can have a bunch of engineers working on the drivetrain, and you can have another set of engineers working on heating, ventilation, cooling. You can have another engineer working on safety systems, entertainment systems, except steering systems. When all of them have sort of optimized their piece of it, you can kind of add it together and you've got a car. And you've got to do some connecting between the pieces, but it's sort of a doable challenge, and you can have a fairly good idea of how the car overall will behave when you add up the subsystems. So that's sort of a machine at work. Reductionism works, specialization in the various pieces, working on the piece parts works, and you can add up the piece parts to get kind of what you expect. And I just think that's become the view of the economy. And I'm trained as an economist, so I say bad things about economists. So I'm not saying other people are bad, saying the way I was trained. But this is why you have all of these, what are called partial equilibrium economists, economists who know about tax policy and economists who know about labor policy and urban economics, et cetera, et cetera. We've got all these silos within the discipline of understanding the economy. And the view kind of is, well, if all of these economists say, what should our monetary policy, what should our fiscal policy, what should our labor policy, what should our competition policy, what should our trade policy, if each of them does the good job and we do what each of them says, voila, we will have an economy that functions. That's the machine kind of metaphor. And just in addition, what's valued more than anything else is incredible depth in your slice of the pie. That is the only way you get a Nobel Prize in the economic sciences, is if you're unbelievably deep in one thing. Yet most Nobel laureates, after they become a Nobel laureate in economics, opine about everything under the sun. It is amazing to me how broadly they opine. And when you know you've read everything they've done and say, well, they never worked once in that territory and they're opining on it. Oh my God. Well, it's because they're a Nobel laureate, so they must be all knowing. Even though the Nobel laureates, I know many of them are smart people and everything, but they were trained in the machine model and then they try to apply it to the overall working. So I think that model is bankrupt, yet we are doubling down more and more and more in that model. And we have such extreme confidence. It's amazing to me how confident economists are. They'll say, oh, we're hitting the fiscal cliff and there's $700 billion going to be sucked out of the economy and we've got to make these adjustments to avoid this terrible thing. And then nothing happens. You go over the fiscal cliff. This is several years ago. We go over the fiscal cliff. Literally nothing noticeable happens. And after the fact, all the economists are like, well, yeah, I guess it wasn't quite the way we thought. What do you mean it wasn't quite the way you thought? You were all running around with your hair on fire saying a disaster is about to befall us. And similarly, the economists were predicting economic growth for 2008 into the fall of 2008, while the economy was crashing into its biggest downturn in modern history since the Great Depression. So It turns out that that machine metaphor does not work, but we're so wedded to it, we just keep doing it. And I think the economy has much more in common to the Amazon jungle, kind of a natural system, what the more geeky people call a complex adaptive system. But think a natural system versus an automobile. That's really what the economy is.
As I was preparing for you today, I jotted down the phrase, just 2 words, and I thought to myself, how much of, and I'm not trying to go back necessarily to the beginning with just talking about the teacher, I wonder about personal responsibility. We've got the micro and the macro, and I feel like, at least for America these days, that most, and you talk about this in your book, people basically say, hey, tell me what I want to hear and I'll vote for you. I really wonder about the American psyche of personal responsibility, that if we're going to fix some of these big picture issues that you're talking about, if the individual refuses, and you also talk about this in the beginning of your book, if the individual refuses to understand any politics, any economics, any psychology, if they refuse to understand anything, and they just want to hear somebody talk on the screen every 2 to 4 years and say something happy, and when there's a market downturn, they just want to see that their stocks magically go back up, even if interest rates go below zero, there's just this thing of where people, it seems like for 20 years we've been on the edge of, okay, if we go over this edge, we're really going to have to take personal responsibility. And then all of a sudden, Fed does some jerry-rigging, stocks go back up, and everybody breathes a sigh of relief and says, oh, my stocks are up high again. There's no more interest income. It strikes me the lack of personal responsibility these days.
I think there's a lot of truth in what you say. I encourage sort of a stepping up and taking care of things yourself to a greater extent. I would say, though, that I would want to be careful to not say it's some gigantic leap. It's just a little step in that direction that I think is required. One of the things I talk about is this idea of multi-homing. You can take personal responsibility for better economic outcomes if you love a particular provider, let's say Amazon Prime, rather than buying 100% of stuff you could buy on Amazon Prime from Amazon Prime. You buy 50% of it or 75% of it, and the other 25 or 50% from some other place. You will be striking a blow for a better future for democratic capitalism. How hard is that? Not. It's a bit inconvenient, perhaps, but it is not super hard, while agreeing with you and saying, I'd like to see more personal responsibility. It's not that leaps and bounds, absolute heroism are required on that front. It's little things, including saying in political campaigns, it is literally taking the time, go to an event, ask politicians different questions than you're asking them now, or you're not asking them at all. Ask for a task. Ask to say, you, politician, cannot fix my life and make it utopia on earth. What do you need from me other than donating and giving you my vote? What do you need me to do? And if the politician doesn't have a good answer, they're not a good politician. It's sort of little, but I think important things. I do agree entirely with you, and I think part of your point, which is if Americans all just sit back and wait for somebody else to solve their problems, we have got a very big problem. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, we can see right now there's quite a few people in the streets not happy. It's not just necessarily, for example, the one guy that was killed by the police. It goes much deeper than that. Clearly, people are just upset, and it probably goes, maybe the issue with George Floyd and maybe the issue with COVID were triggers, but I think there were latent underlying conditions ready to spring out of people being very upset.
I couldn't agree more. I think there could have been different reactions if the underlying situation were different. But to me, it's unsurprising, and I would say some of what's going on, not all. I will never want to say that somehow I anticipated, kind of George Floyd and the reaction to George Floyd in the project. No, but a bunch of the things that are happening now were things that I worried about that spurred me to dedicate 6 years of my life to this particular project.
You know what's so interesting too? You bring up the notion of hey, don't do all of your shopping on Amazon. Perhaps go to somebody local and give them your business. What's so interesting about that is, yes, that makes a lot of sense. It's the speed at which Amazon eliminated that, because that was America, strip malls and malls and little stores everywhere that people would go. And like less than 10 years, Amazon eliminated that. It just the speed at which it happened. And of course, there's a lot of benefit for people. People all of a sudden, oh my gosh, this shopping at home stuff is really great. I get a cardboard box at my door every day and people are addicted to it. So it's a really tricky conundrum, isn't it?
It is. You could argue that that's just a second wave. The first wave was Walmart killing all the local little stores and having everybody go to their supercenters. And now it's the second wave. But I think your fundamental point, which, boy, when it happens, it can happen kind of really big, really kind of faster than you might expect, really excessively. And that's why I think having citizens recognizing that their purchasing patterns really have a lot of strength in them is a really important insight for people to internalize. They aren't just powerless and bobbing on the surface of the ocean. They have a certain level of agency that is absolutely within their control. So I'm not saying everybody has to go out and start an NGO designed to save the world and stop their job and do something else. No, nor do I say that about anybody. This is one of the things that I've come to believe firmly, which is don't try. If you have the machine analogy, if we've got somebody chasing us who's dangerous, stamp on the gas and go as fast as you can. That doesn't work in the economy. In natural systems, when you step on the proverbial gas and something that's exactly the opposite of what you hoped would happen is likely to happen. The way forward with complex adaptive systems is tweak, 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 tweak. Just keep making little tweaks, and some of them won't work, and then try something else. And that's why I say a whole lot of people have a whole lot of little jobs to start tweaking this system in the right direction, in a direction that's more productive rather than some master stroke that's going to change everything.
So what's interesting about that thought, the master stroke to change everything, I think one could look at coming out of the dot-com bubble. We're flat on our back in the fall of 2002, and they bring the rates down really low. And everyone's seen the Big Short movie, so everyone knows what happens after we get low rates into 02, 03, then we get the Big Short movie. We replay it again, and here we are in 2020 with no rates again, but at least we've got stocks high. Now, I think what's interesting about that, for the last 20 years, it almost looks like Fed policy has been designed to benefit boomers, to keep their stocks high as they approach their 70s, 80s. But then this leaves a situation for the younger generation. Baristas at Starbucks aren't buying Amazon shares. There seems to be a generational break as well in this, where it's not necessarily, in my mind, can I see that you could get all sides to look at this from a common vantage, because everyone's not coming at it from a common vantage.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm less convinced than you that the fault line is boomers versus, that it's a demographic move as opposed to its policy that's directly benefiting anybody who's a capital holder, who's sort of capital long. Unfortunately, it's favoring what I call the expectations economy over the real economy. All right, I wrote a previous book called Fixing the Game in 2011 about this. But in short, stock market is about expectations. People somehow kind of think, if they aren't thinking kind of deeply and carefully about this, that somehow a stock price is a reflection of reality. Kind of, it's not. The S&P 500 is traded at about 19 times earnings through its history. Essentially, when you buy a share of stock, you are paying 1 time for reality, what they're really earning, and 18 times that for what you imagine they will earn in the future. It's about the expectations of future earnings. It's a very ethereal thing, not a real thing. Essentially, what's been essentially happening is the Fed policy has buoyed the expectations economy as opposed to the real economy. And that's why we have stock prices that are high, in part because when you take all those future earnings stream that you imagine have expectations will happen and discount it at a lower number because the underlying interest rates are lower, the rate that you discount future earnings at is lower. That makes those future earnings worth more. And so the stock price stays high relative to reality. And that's why you can have the schism that we currently have between the real economy, where for most people it's doing like blah, but the stock market can be doing great. It's because the Fed is pulling the largest lever you can pull on that to keep expectations of future earnings higher. So I'm more interested in the real economy, having kind of the real part of the economy is a company building real factories that produce real products or services and selling them to real customers for real money and earning a real profit or loss. That's what I'm interested in, that doing as well as possible.
Keep it in Amazon for a second. You brought up the workers, not a living wage, and a phrase very important to you, and I want to let you run with it, economic efficiency. Okay, I'm Jeff Bezos. I, with my small team, developed this great software platform. We figure out all this logistics. I mean, they've got all this code figured out. And then ultimately, once all that brain power is done, they need people to do not the most complicated jobs on the tail end of things. But that also ends up being where the vast number of people are that are helping to work for Amazon.
Amazon is a very interesting company in that respect, I would argue. It's so different from Facebook. There is no physical manifestation of Facebook, whereas Amazon is this software platform attached to this vast physical manifestation. It makes for a very interesting, and in some sense, among the FANG companies, it is unique in that respect.
That's what you're getting at, though, in the efficiency, in the sense that Amazon brings their need for human capital down to the bare element, to the lowest price they can get for not the most sophisticated job necessarily. Important jobs for the people that have them, but it's not the most sophisticated job. But speak to me about economic efficiency and what's driving your concern there.
Well, it's the concern for the extremes of it. I think you and I could both agree that we're not against love, are we?
Love?
Love, yes.
Love?
Yes.
What kind of love?
The love of another person. We're not against that. But we would be against obsessive love that would cause you to hurt that person if they did not reciprocate that love, for example. That's the same way I feel about efficiency. Like love, efficiency is good, but obsessive efficiency isn't. And it's in the category of too much of a good thing ceases to be a good thing. If by efficiency you start to mean, well, if I can grind down wages kind of one more notch, that's a good thing. If I can drive out slack one more degree, that's a good thing. If the answer is it's always a good thing no matter where you are, that's obsessiveness. That's not saying there's some kind of reasonable balance. So Slack is a good example. W. Edwards Deming, genius of total quality, who brought the world total quality, I think would be rolling over in his grave now where his work has been taken. He showed how you could use total quality processes to eliminate slack and eliminate inefficiencies and ineffectiveness. But he is the guy who said, but there's an optimal level of slack and it's not zero. Meanwhile, retailers generally are saying, let's see, how can we get rid of all the slack? If this is the number of hours, person hours of our employees on the store floor, the retail floor, when we have this many customers on average, let's try and get us down to zero excess labor. When you take it that far, and when you take it that far to say, if we can create more competition for our jobs, we can pay lower wages, you're having kind of unintended consequences. So you're having employees in Walmart having a wage below the living wage, trudging around the store, kind of not being inspired to serve their customers. They're good people, no doubts. But if you look at their scheduling, where in retailing, people do not realize that in order to have kind of efficiency in staffing, a single mom can be asked by her retailer to work the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift on Tuesday, and Wednesday be there for the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift. That would not be unusual. And that's all efficient. But if you look more broadly, you're ruining her life, making it impossible to schedule her life, making it impossible for her to come to work feeling kind of ready to happily serve the customer. If instead you're Costco and you're trying to compete on kind of really crisp, low prices in the club category, but you want to have customers feel awesome about shopping at Costco, what you do is you do the same calculations and say, yeah, but what if we pay $22 an hour rather than $12 an hour? Won't we get better people, happier people, people who will serve our customers better? And why don't we figure out what is kind of the zero slack number of people to have on the floor at any hour given the traffic patterns? And let's just add 20%. I don't know what they're going to be doing exactly, but I bet you it's going to be taking longer, being more careful and dutiful in serving customers. And then you have sales per square foot that's off the charts, profitability that's off the charts, customer loyalty that's off the charts, because you haven't been obsessive about efficiency. But does Jim Senegal and the rest of the management team at Costco care about efficiency? Damn right, but not obsessively.
The counter to this is if it is obsessive efficiency, and you've used the phrase that we're kind of bankrupt right now, then ultimately forget democratic capitalism. You're going to have a lot of people wanting democratic socialism. So it's kind of like incumbent on corporate leaders to look more holistically at what's going on here.
Absolutely. That's why it's not a machine. It's more like a garden. It's more like a jungle, which is you can't just say, I'm sure if I take this out, I will make more money. It's like the long time story. McDonald's was once the beloved chain, beloved by all, where you could get a Big Mac and it was a big kind of meal. There was probably a decade where the geniuses at McDonald's said, well, we can shave that patty a little bit more off each time and a little less lettuce. And
the patty ends up looking like a pickle.
Exactly. And that would be a metaphor for thinking about it as a machine. It's sort of like, yeah, if we can make that patty a little bit thinner and we take all of that meat that we've saved together, that would be $80 million, I'm making this up, but $80 million a year that'll fall right to the bottom line. Slowly over some period of time, people just said, going to McDonald's is no fun, tiny, pathetic little thing. And the customers stopped showing up, and sales per store kind of fall. And now of late, McDonald's has been trying to build back their customer base and having some success doing it. But it's a long process to do it. But all those things were done as if it's a machine. Like the customers are the customers. They like McDonald's. They like the Big Mac. And if it's a little bit thinner, that's not going to change them. How do you know that in a complex adaptive system? How do you know that? The answer is you don't. But if you've got these hyper-confident reductionists who are taught sort of mathematical models for making these decisions, then you're going to get decisions like that.
You're giving some great examples on nudges in corporate America, a couple examples. Look, and your work is going to get a lot deeper than we do in this conversation just because of time. But I was thinking, as we talk about corporate America and their obsession for efficiency, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, plenty of friends and family associated with 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States of America. And there's one thing I know for sure deep in my bones, is that if we're going down the efficient route in corporate America, there is absolutely nothing efficient going on inside U.S. government in terms of the bureaucracy. It's the most inefficient thing that one has ever seen. And again, as you say, adaptive and all kinds of moving pieces and everything ties together. I really worry these days that many people in America are looking at their government job, if they have one, as part of their voting habit, meaning I'm going to vote for who protects my government job, which creates a lot of interesting issues in a society. It's back to our very starting example with the teacher. There's the corporate side of this, and there's the government side as well, too. All the employees that make up that massive bureaucracy.
I would say so, although I have to say I'm a little bit different in point of view on the pursuit of efficiency in government. I actually think that much of what they're doing is obsessive pursuit of efficiency, for what it's worth. Now, it's an efficiency that benefits themselves only.
But if I go into the post office or the DMV, the last thing that I'm thinking of is the word efficient.
Yes, I would say, my rule on monopolies, so DMV is a monopoly. My view on monopolies is monopolies exist only to serve themselves. So I'd agree with that. But if you're just talking about the political realm as opposed to government regulated monopolies like the post office or the DMV, I would say that much of what they're doing is about efficiency. Like, it is super efficient to gerrymander so that you don't have to run for office every 2 years. Like, it's just a trivial exercise.
Most incumbent members of Congress win. It's like, 93, 94%, something crazy.
Yeah, and that's super efficient for them. So I don't have to worry. I don't actually have to run. That's why the getting primaried thing that AOC kind of did is such a blow to efficiency. If you take their perspective, efficiency is making sure that you don't have to waste any time or effort on getting reelected because your seat has been appropriately gerrymandered, and it's super hard for somebody to win the primary to become the candidate. And then other things that you are efficiency oriented. If you're thinking of yourselves as an elected politician and you want it efficient for you, all the House rules that say all sorts of things can never get to the floor so that you don't even have to bother to have a vote for them, all of those can be seen, I think, as dedication to the same kind of crazy efficiency that I say corporations do. It's a system. It's a complex adaptive system that has its way of working. Now, does it produce a good outcome for the populace? No. But the challenge is, how does the populace force change? It is super hard. It is coming. If you run that system for efficiency for the people inside the system only, it's going to collapse catastrophically. Until that happens, those running the system will just keep doing what they're doing.
A lot of what you're doing here, obviously, is the conversation starter. And it is sad that if you think, when's the last time, and I'm not tooting my horn here, you've done all the hard work, but when's the last time you flipped on a CNN, a Fox, an MSNBC, and heard an hour-long conversation, and you and I are just touching on issues, but they don't touch on anything. I saw a quote the other day. I thought it was great. It used to be that the news would tell us what was happening, and then we had to decide, okay, what's our point of view about that? And now the news tells us what we're supposed to believe, and then we have to decide, did that even happen?
I think that's about right.
I give you credit because you're pushing the conversation starter, but the reality is getting people into this thinking terribly difficult. Before we run out of time, there's one thing I wanted to bring up. I really want your point of view. It would not have been my first gut level feel, but I want you to explain your perspective. So you see it that most monopolies eventually retire, expire, go away, etc. So if I look at a situation right now with, I can imagine Netflix not being at the top of the heap. But if I look at an Amazon, if I look at an Apple, if I look at a Google, if I look at a Facebook, and I look at their income streams, I look at the cash on hand, I look at the brand they have, I look at what they do, what they control. And if an upstart shows up looking to cause any problem for their monopoly dominance, they can just buy them out and absorb them into their, ecosystem. It seems really difficult for perhaps some of the current monopolies to go by the way of the dinosaur. In fact, I can't imagine it in my lifetime. Am I completely crazy?
Nothing you've said this hour makes me think you're completely crazy, my friend. But I think it's more through history. I have to look at where these things happen. You could have said exactly the same thing you said about IBM in 1968 or 1970. You could have said the same thing about AT&T in 1992 when it was the most valuable company on the face of the planet. And of course, people say, but AT&T is still around. No, it's not. Southwest Bell Corporation bought it for a song and just borrowed the brand name because AT&T is a better brand name than SBC. So it doesn't exist. These monopolies have a way of disappearing and disappearing quite spectacularly. After the fact, everybody would say, oh, yes, of course, AT&T was a bloated bureaucracy. It had the long distance kind of domination. And when that market opened up, they weren't ready. Yeah, we can see that. At the time, nobody was saying that. And the stock price, which is expectations of future, would have not been consistent with that. So I think the general rule just is if you are a monopoly, you don't have to listen to your customers. And you can spend your time, as you say, establishing kill zones around your base business where you kill or buy everything in the kill zone. Remind me again how that's good for your customers, how that's thinking about your customers. It's not. Those businesses all had customers, and those customer bases were growing quickly before you killed them. How many Nest users do you know that were happy that Google bought Nest? Nest was the most consumer-friendly kind of company that made it easy for you to install a really smart home system. And then Google says, I want to own the home and I will grab Nest. So they just can't make themselves think first and foremost about customers. It's not that they're bad people, but you only adjust to annoying things that customers do when you have to. And if you don't have to, you won't. Did Microsoft work assiduously hard at making Windows as user-friendly for customers as humanly possible? No, I remember at various institutions I was in when they would say that the next Windows upgrade is coming out and you need to bring your laptop in to get it installed. And I'd be, do I have to? Like, what kind of a consumer reaction is that? Do I have to install the new thing from this company? And these things happen all in different ways. So does Windows still have absolute dominance over people using a personal computer? Absolutely. What don't they have dominance over anymore? They don't have dominance over the number of hours a user spends looking at a smart screen, because that smart screen they're looking at now is going to be a mobile phone for more hours of the day than a computer. And Microsoft, last time I checked, has, I believe, 0.04% of the operating systems for smartphones. And how about iPads? They have something like a 5% market share of that. Their monopoly has been demolished just in a different way than people think of it. And the reason was they did not have to serve their customers. Full stop. I just think these companies are writing their own death certificate by striving to be and striving to maintain a monopoly rather than saying, you know what, we're better off if we have tough competitors. That's how Procter & Gamble ends up being around for 200 years. It has never been without exceedingly tough competitors. The best thing for Procter & Gamble right now is the existence of Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, Colgate, J&J, L'Oreal. That makes their job really, really hard. And that makes them get better every year.
I love the perspective. I'm sure you're making everybody think. Look, if you look at cash on hand and you look at some of the dominance of their brands and what they do, I mean, I can't see anybody on the horizon that's going to take over Google search anytime again in my lifetime. I mean, but I guess there could be something new that happens around the corner that I'm not imagining or understanding, etc. Some of these look pretty safe, but you definitely put the food for thought out there.
First company in history that is going to flush $500 billion down the drain with all these crazy things they're working on, completely unconstrained by any sense of competition. They're just one thing after another. We're going to add up the Google Glasses of the world, and it's going to end up being $500 billion before they're done.
One last thought that we didn't talk about it, but it's just kind of a side tangent. I remember years ago getting my MBA, and I love the way you describe the MBA structure, the silos also. And I thought, my gosh, that's exactly how I felt. I couldn't word it at the time. You just walked away with these little, okay, here's finance, here's accounting, here's market. It was all disconnected, and there wasn't really a big picture perspective. And it was just felt like, to me, the biggest waste of my time.
Yeah, you and me both. I'm the son of an entrepreneur who started his company when I was 2, my dad. So I just grew up at the kitchen table with it. And when you compare what I learned from my dad at the kitchen table, who, by the way, was a high school educated person, never went to a day of college, what I learned from him versus what I learned at Harvard Business School, it is a completely unfair comparison. It would be somewhere between 10x and 100x my dad versus Harvard Business School.
And that gets back to the beginning of my conversation, really, ultimately, the personal responsibility part, because, when you're forced to go kill it, cook it, eat it, something happens in your DNA that's entirely different than I thought I was going down the right path, and I thought I had the right degree, and it didn't work out for me, and now I don't have enough money. When you have that entrepreneurial mindset, you're always prepared for the proverbial, what to hit the fan and for everything to go south. You're working from that standpoint that it could all blow up at any moment.
Yeah. The interesting thing about it, my dad was an entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur twice over. But the following perspective, I think, is very interesting. The late Jim March of Stanford was one of the absolutely greatest management thinkers of the 20th century. And also on the side wrote books and books of French poetry. So he's an interesting guy. Wrote something once in praise of delusion. And what he said is, we are fortunate to have in this country this huge body of delusional people, and they are entrepreneurs. We know statistically that 9 out of 10 of them will fail completely and lose all their money whilst doing it. But all of them go into it thinking they'll be the one that succeeds. And we need each of those 10 to be deluded enough to think that they'll be the one that succeeds, so that we get the one that succeeds, because those are the people that power the economy. So it's I've always thought of it as an interesting view, because he's right. Entrepreneurship is not some ticket for success. I mean, I laughed at many students who come to me and say, well, I want to be an entrepreneur. And it's sort of like, do you know what that means? Because I watched my dad almost go out of business twice because his factory burnt down once, and cataclysmic crash in the prices in his industry another time. It's actually a little bit trickier than you might think. But since we only call entrepreneurs, right? We don't call people who fail entrepreneurs. We only call people entrepreneurs who were entrepreneurial and succeeded. So we have this giant success bias where we look at the entrepreneurs, I want to be like that. Well, yes, but for every one of people like that, there are 9 who failed. So it's a tough road to hoe. Is it one I advocate? Absolutely. But it ain't quite as easy as people in general think.
A whole different conversation of what it would take to be the successful entrepreneur, because a lot of those ones that fail, maybe there's a lot of reasons for failure, not necessarily only because they put in the exact same effort as Bill Gates, and Bill Gates just happened to win by luck, and it gets more complicated. It becomes an interesting conversation.
I mean, I think it's a fascinating one, because I think it's a multi-factor thing. There's a whole bunch of things that go into it. So maybe we'll have that conversation someday, my friend.
Yes. Great stuff. Hey, the book, When More Is Not Better, Overcoming America's Obsession with Economic Efficiency. Again, we just touched on issues. You get into the nitty gritty, you get into the details. Is there a website you would like to direct people to?
Sure. I have a website where all my writing is, and it's just www.rogerlmartin.com. So remember the L, my middle initial is L for Lloyd, rogerlmartin.com. You can order the book there, and you can see everything else I've written. This interview will be up as soon as it's up. It'll be on the site too.
I hope I kept you stimulated enough for an hour. I've been doing this for a long time, but I still never know, because you end up talking to all these very bright people like yourself, and I'm just a guy hanging out, just having conversations, trying to pull stuff from people like you. So I never know if I hit the mark, or I'm halfway there, or, something like that.
You did. I think it's what you do as an art form, which is creating a conversation. Some people just have a list of questions and run through the list of questions, and you might as well not have been live or anything. You could have done it on a blog. Other people create a conversation.
Hold on, you don't think I had a list of questions here? Are you trying to tell me, with all your experience, you're telling me I had no questions? You're right. I've got some words and I've got doodles.
Yeah, exactly. And so you craft a conversation. So this is both fun and enjoyable for me to have a conversation with you. So thank you for taking the time.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.